All right, believe everybody's about made their way into the classes. Thank you so much for those who are sticking around for this. Again, we're coming to the close of this study. We should probably finish either today or next Sunday, Lord willing. We will wrap up the intertestament period. I told them in class, if you'll stick around, again, we encourage everybody to stick around, but if the history stuff maybe is not your cup of tea, we'll take a little bit of break from that. What we're going to do is begin to look in scriptures, kind of show you how I go about studying the scripture, taking a verse, breaking that down, looking at it, going back to the original language. I'm going to kind of show you what that's about. Like when I'll say, I'll say in the original language it's translated this way. We'll view that. I think it'll help us as we're looking at translations. You may be here and you say, well, I like a particular kind of translation. That'll help you when we go into doing that with the idea of what, when I say, well, the King James translates it this way, the ESV may translate it this way, but what does the original say? So we're going to kind of get into that, show you how I go about exegeting these passages. So I've got a few in mind. If you have one that you would really like to see, please feel free to share that with me. I'll try to break it down for you, but we'll look at putting it in context, what we're looking at in that, again, breaking that apart, seeing what these words mean, and see if we can really get, because it's very enjoyable if you can get to where you're looking and examining these scriptures like that. I'll show you the different programs you can use. They're free. If you don't like a computer, I'll show you how to find those in the books, in the Strong's Concordance, those like that, lexicons. But anyway, we'll go through all of that when we get done with this in the intertestament period. So hopefully that'll help you want to get your appetite to where you want to get down and really study and grow, because if you find yourself devoting some time to do this, I think you will really enjoy it. Now, we're coming to the point again, we're coming to the close of this. We're getting closer to the time of Christ there in Palestine. So last week we were talking about the Hasmonean Empire, and we talked about how this was stemmed down from Mattathias. He was a Jew there in Modin. We remember Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. He was going to go through, he was making them sacrifice swine on the altar. So they would not do this. The Jewish revolt, which is typically called the Maccabean revolt, it is going to be taking place. And then through the descendants of the Maccabees, what we have is this Hasmonean dynasty, what we would call. It's a group of individuals that were priests and kind of kings. They kind of had them setting them up in this Judea area. We made the note there as well that this is where we stem and we get our Pharisees and Essenes and eventually the Sadducees. So when we begin to study the New Testament, this is how we get from the Old Testament not hearing about these to the New Testament to hear about them. So these guys are important, the Hasmonean Empire. So again, we spoke about that they were Hellenized, or they really adopted the Greek culture of the time. So they have these, again, these priest kings, and they were really pushed back from some of the traditional, again, like the Pharisees that were going by the Moses' commands, the Pentateuch, and they were going by that, and they said, well, we got to have a king from the line of David, and the high priest has to be descendants of Levi. So what we have here, again, is setting it up for this establishment. A lot has happened. So now what we're going to find is the Roman period. So we've gotten to that. In Daniel, he talks about the diverse beast, that this being Rome. He's going to be different, because what we'll find is that Rome initially started out as a republic, ended up being an empire, that it was not ran the same way as the other ones, but eventually it does. But even the Rome having the senates and things like that, republic. Now, here's our time stamp in BC 63. So the Romans come in and they decide, or they're going to conquer into Palestine, and the general Pompey. Now, you probably haven't heard of the general named Pompey unless you are a history nerd, but you've probably heard of the other general that he was fighting against, and that was Julius Caesar. So many have heard of Julius Caesar. At this time, when Rome was in this position, they were looking at a king, right? They were, again, you see Caesar, Kaiser, kind of that king phrasing in that. But we have Julius Caesar, and he's going to be fighting. He's going to be leading the army, some of the army of Rome. And then we have the General Pompey, and he's going to be leading another army in Rome, for Rome. And they're going to kind of have to battle it out. That's typically the way it was ran. When you look back at Alexander the Great, the 4 kingdoms that were established after this was because whoever had the strongest military typically controlled. They had the power. So the Hasmoneans are in Judea, and there's kind of these guys are appointed, so they're kind of fighting for who's going to be the top man. So you have Hyrcanus the second. So remember John Hyrcanus, going back to that, being Jonathan's son. So we have John Hyrcanus, so his son Hyrcanus, and then Aristobulus the second. Both sons, well, I said Hyrcanus the second was the son of John Hyrcanus. I think he was a grandson, excuse me. So both sons of Alexander and Jannaeus. So these individuals, and again, I know these names are hard. They're hard for me to try to remember and put back. But essentially, we're looking at Rome is now in power, and these Hasmoneans who came through the Maccabees are in power in Judea. So we're going to see this power struggle kind of going on. Now, the conquering Romans made Hyrcanus II the high priest and the ethnarch. So when you hear that word ethnarch, we'll be hearing words like prefect and governor and things like that. So this ethnarch, he is going to be the ruler of a people. So he said, Rome's the power. They're the real men in charge, but you can be in charge. We kind of call those vassals, the vassal kings. They're like puppet kings is what we call them, or like history calls them. So they're in power, but they're not really in power. They don't make any decisions. They don't really have any say in anything. Pretty much the higher powers make the decision, Rome, and they tell Hyrcanus II what to say and what to do. So we find them there again. Rome has conquered the land. They've got the bigger military force. So they come in, take the land over, and they appoint Hyrcanus II, being from that. Now, notice, this power, the real power behind the throne, however, lay with Hyrcanus' advisor, Antipater. And it's hard for me to say, Antipater. But anyway, this is not, you'll see that word kind of coming up. But again, this is his advisor. Now, he gains the favor of Rome. And again, Rome tells them kind of what to do. And Antipater kind of advises Hyrcanus what to do. So after a while, they make Antipater governor of Judea and appoint his sons, Phasael and Herod, as military governors of Jerusalem and Galilee. So those names sound a little more familiar. Now you'll hear, here in a moment, we'll talk about Herod Antipater. So make sure we don't confuse those two. We'll get to him in a moment. So Antipater, he is the governor. Again, he's not the ethnarch, he is the governor. So he's appointed his 2 sons as military governors, Jerusalem and Galilee. So here we find Herod. Now, he's going to be set up in this land of the Jews, but Antipater is not a Jew. Herod is not a Jew. He is an Edomian or an Edomite. He is that of the descendant of Esau. But the Hasmoneans had made the kind of the rule of thumb that we're going to practice Jewish customs. So they really couldn't tell them much apart. They said, you're doing all this stuff, and there was little distinction, at least to the Romans. They said, we don't see any distinction between these 2 groups. So he's an Edomite, he's a Jew. They don't matter to them. You're going to be king. Eventually he's fixing to be king of the Jews there, what we will see here in just a moment. So they're going to make him the governor. Again, there's 2 boys, so this is important. I'll give you just a little bit of time. I know some of these slides have a little more on them, but there's a lot that you've got to remember going in before we find the distinction here. All right, so really to take away from that, Antipater is his advisor, and Rome favors him. They set him up as governor, and he appoints his 2 sons, Phasael and Herod, there in Jerusalem and Galilee. All right. Now, so Antipater is this guy. So he's killed 43 BC. So again, this power struggle is going to be happening between a man named Antigonus, the son of Aristobulus II, and Antipater's 2 sons, Herod and Phasael. So again, I know these, you don't name your kids these words, any of these names anymore. They're all with A's and they're hard to remember, but just follow along with me here. Essentially, what we need to learn from this is Phasael, he is captured, he commits suicide. Herod has said, I'm going to Rome, right? They had Roman favor, so he says, I don't really have the favor that I need in Judea, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Rome, and that's what I'm going to have my help. So Herod is a very sneaky fellow. He's a very deceiving individual, as we'll see here in just a moment. But he says, all right, there's a power struggle, right? Antagonist, he's trying to take over power. Well, I've got to get out of here. I'm going to be killed. So Phasael, he's captured, commits suicide. He's out of the way. Now that leaves Herod. All right, so returning to Israel, now Herod, he has gotten the blessings from Rome. He has weaseled his way in and got the blessings from Rome. He comes back down into Jerusalem, and he is going to defeat, and he executed Antagonist, and that man was the last of the Hasmonean rulers. So again, you kind of think about this power struggle between the Hasmoneans, these priest kings, again, going back to the Maccabean revolt. And then you have the Edomians appointed rulers there going in like that. So what's going to happen is, obviously, Herod's going to come out on top. So the Hasmonean dynasty, it's over with the death of Antigonus. He is going to be the last one of that lineage from Mattathias, Judas Maccabeus, Simon, Jonathan, John Hyrcanus, all of those, Hyrcanus II, all of those men are behind that ruling power is gone away with. So we have no more of these priest kings established here. So the Herodian dynasty now begins because he comes through, and again, whoever's got the army, whoever's got the might is going to be in power. You can't fight against, and it was hard to fight against Rome. They were very, very skilled soldiers. Very interesting. If you like Roman history, look into some of those things. It's really interesting. I'm trying to give you some time to write all this stuff down. If you read about Caesar's 10th Legion, they were some tough guys. Interesting stuff. All right, so the Herodian dynasty is in place. Now, so then when we get to talking about Herod in the Bible, so Herod the Great is typically what this man is known by. So when you see through Jewish historians, Josephus and men like that, and ancient historians, that he reigned in that area. He was king of the Jews under Roman authority, 33 years. But notice that date is 37 BC to 4 BC. So again, I know I brought this up before, but when we look at Christ being, 0, right, and then 1 AD and following after that, and things like we begin to kind of put it right there, again, BC before Christ. But if Herod is the one that's killing all the Jews or the babies in Bethlehem, then if he's dead at 4 BC, well, the math doesn't add up. So typically when you hear me say that about the founding of the church, or the beginning of the church, I should say, in Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, many people look at it and say, well, it's 33 AD. Well, maybe it is, maybe it's not. It's not a salvation issue, it's just something to think about. Again, we don't need to just take people's words for it. We need to do our own study in it. So this Herod the Great, this is the Herod that appears, again, Matthew chapter 2, 1 through 19, Luke chapter 1, verse 5, that when we hear this, and again, Herod, think of Herod like Pharaoh. These names, you'll hear different Herods, but typically it's just called Herod, just like Pharaoh is typically just called Pharaoh in the Bible. Sometimes the Caesars are called out, but sometimes you'll see that it just says Caesar as well. So, Herod the Great. So, this poor fella, not really poor fella, but this guy, because he was an Edomian, again, he was an Edomite, he was not truly a Jew. The Jews never accepted him. They said, you can't be king of the Jews, you're not a real Jew. And he really hated that. Now, this guy was very unstable mentally. I mean, I'm going to tell you some stories about him here. He was not mentally stable. So to legitimize his claim to the throne, you might remember that chart that we brought down. Mariamne, she was going to be coming from that Hasmonean dynasty. So he's going to divorce his wife Doris, and he's going to marry Mariamne. Of course, he's eventually going to put her to death because he suspects her of trying to get rid of him, to kill him. Again, this guy is crazy. So we say all that to say, you think, well, how would a king, why would the king of the Jews destroy every male child in Bethlehem? Well, he was a crazy person. He was very crazy. He was always thinking people were plotting against him. He was very paranoid, and we're going to get into some of that here in just a moment. He was very jealous, but he was a great architect. When you go back and you study some of the stuff that Herod built, that's why they call him Herod the Great. He wasn't great because he was a good guy. He was great because he built a lot of things. He oversaw a lot of the buildings that were going on. So again, he marries Mariamne, as Brother Dan Cates told us in class. He built a tower and dedicated it to her, and then he killed her. So if Herod was going to dedicate something to you in that time, you best leave Jerusalem and Judea because you were about to die. So he would kill a lot of his family because he thought they were plotting to overthrow him. And again, he kind of got to that position through conniving and weaseling his way in, so he was always afraid that was going to happen to him. So he's going to end up, we find here that, listen to this one, the Roman Emperor Augustus. So when you go back to Rome here in just a minute, you have Pompey, you have Julius Caesar, and then you have them fighting it out. Julius Caesar becomes the emperor of Rome, and then you have the power struggle kind of between Mark Antony, and then you'll typically hear him called Octavian, this son maybe of Julius Caesar. They think maybe he was the son of Julius Caesar. So they're kind of battling it out. So you hear of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Those names kind of ring a bell. But Octavian is going to come out triumphant. He's going to win. And then they change his name when he becomes emperor to Augustus. So when you hear Augustus, think of Octavian. You can thank the Romans when we think of August. You think of Augustus. So that is where that comes from. Now, so again, when you hear these words, you'll hear about them sometimes in readings. Octavian, Augustus, same guy. So he says that he would rather be Herod's pig than his son. So as it's pointed in the chart up here, the Greek words hus and huis, it sounds very similar. But what Augustus was getting at was that Herod was trying to be a Jew, so he would, abstain from pigs, right, from swine. And he said the pig would be safer. He'd kill his sons, and he did. He killed his sons, killed his wife, and he said, I'd rather be his pig because he wouldn't kill him because he's trying to be a practicing Jew. So interesting nonetheless. So this madman, he says, all right, can they slaughter the innocent lives of these children? In Matthew chapter 2, 1 through 18, absolutely. He put a lot of people to death. In fact, I'll tell you this and then we'll move on from Herod the Great. At his death, he knew that he was very despised. So he took a lot of the Jewish rulers in that area and he said, he made the edict go down that when I die, you will put all of these Jewish leaders to death. He said, I know no one will mourn for me at my death, but there will be mourning at my death. So think of that guy. He says, all right, all these guys are going to die too, so at least people are not throwing parades when Herod the Great dies. But obviously when he died, they're like, we're not doing that. We're not going to kill everybody for that reason. So they denounced all that, said, no, we're not doing any of that stuff. So Herod the Great, what a guy. So after his death, Augustus, again, this is the Caesar, this is the emperor of Rome. He appointed Archelaus, ethnarch of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. So again, think of, in your mind, you've got Samaria to the north, Judea, and then Idumea down below that. But he was quickly removed. He was one of Herod's sons, and he wasn't getting the job done, essentially. So he's removed from office. And then we find that the Romans now say we're going to have Judea and Samaria ruled by governors and prefects. So you'll hear this word sometimes. That leads us to, again, the most important individual that we will find. Again, he's kind of let the Jews kind of have it, but like, you can't do this stuff. We've got to have somebody else that's going to be more Roman ruled. So what we find here, the most important guy, that is Pontius Pilate. So AD 26 to AD 36, Pontius Pilate will rule in Jerusalem, in Judea, and he is that man. Obviously, we find that Christ goes before him, and he ends up crucifying Christ with the Jews and the uproar. Pontius Pilate gives the decree for him to be crucified. So this is how he is set up. So you think, okay, I'm in the Old Testament now. I get to the New Testament. I've got Sadducees, Pharisees. I've got Roman rulers. There's governors. Why is he having to be carried? And we're going to note here again in just a moment. Somebody else here. Like, why is he carried to Pontius Pilate? We'll see in just a minute. He's carried to Herod Antipas as well. So this is why, again, it really helps, does it not, when you get to study the New Testament. So other governors, Felix, we talked about him this morning in our Bible, in our sermon. You have Festus. You hear about him as well. Again, Paul stood before these men. These were governors, just like Pontius Pilate, in the same capacity. So Rome is getting their rule now. All right. So after AD 6, again, we've noticed that. BC 0, now we're moving into AD 6, so now all the dates will be going in the other direction. So the territory that was formerly allotted to Archelaus was ruled by selective Roman governors, as we see. Now Herod Antipas, he becomes the tetrarch. You'll hear him sometimes, Herod the tetrarch. That is a man that is ruling a fourth part of a country. So when we hear of this tetrarch, he's kind of a fourth of a ruling set. So Herod Antipas became tetrarch of Galilee and Perea from his father's death in 4 BC until he was disposed by the Emperor Caligula in AD 39. So you have Roman rule. Pilate is the governor. You have Festus. You have Felix. They're the Roman governors. But Herod Antipas is going to be, again, he's kind of this, kind of like a ruler, if you will, there of Galilee and Perea. So interesting about that. Then we find Caligula there saying no more of this, AD 39. Give you a little bit of time. Again, I all know these slides are long. We got about 10 minutes, so we're good. More time. All right, then. Now, this Herod Antipas. So when you're studying your Bible, you read about Herod in the beginning, in Mark or in Matthew's account and Luke's account. Then towards the end, you begin to hear about another Herod. So he is the Herod of Jesus' public ministry. He's the one that imprisoned John the Baptist. So again, it's not Herod the Great, but it's Herod Antipas. He's going to execute John because John spoke out about Herodias, his brother Philip's ex-wife. And you can see the references there for that. So again, it's good for the Bible student to go through these things and say, all right, which Herod are we talking about? Helps date things as we go along. Again, give you a little time for that. I guess in those pauses, if you have a question, holler out there. All right. Herod Antipas. Again, not the Antipas that we heard about, the advisor for Hyrcanus II. Different Antipas. All right. Also, this man, he was the guy who wondered about Jesus' identity when he speculated that after he had beheaded John, that he had rose from the dead. We find him there. And then when Jesus was warned about by the Pharisees about Herod seeking his life, he's the one that he calls that fox. Herod, that fox. So Herod being in that area. It's pretty neat. So again, kind of to the close of the books, Herod Antipas, the beginning of the book, Herod the Great, is what you need to take from this. All right. Let's try to go a little. Again, we don't have very much, but I'm going to try to finish out, so just bear with me here. We'll get to it. Herod Antipas, he's going to get his wish again to see Jesus. When you read that account in Luke 23, 7 through 12, Acts 4, 27, when he is before Pilate, and then Pilate hears that he's in Herod's jurisdiction, he's from Judea, he sends him to Herod. So that's not Herod the Great, so not the same guy that tried to kill Jesus when he was a baby, Herod Antipas, that he will stand before him there. Now, we got 5 minutes, so I think we can get it. We'll go ahead and button it up today. What we're looking at again is this going down, and now we're beginning to see more and more of the events that are happening in the New Testament. We've gone from the Old Testament, again, all the way back to Babylonian captivity, Medo-Persians, Greece. Now we're in Rome. And now we find here that these individuals that we're talking about, we hear about there in the New Testament. Now let's discuss the Roman Empire as we close out today. So Augustus, he becomes the emperor in 31 BC. The Roman Empire entered a state, what is typically called Roman or Pax Romana, or Roman peace. That's important. That when Rome ruled, again you have Babylon, the Assyrians, Babylon, Greece, the Medo-Persians and Greece, and then Rome. So all these empires have been fighting, they've been going and battling it out, trying to gain more territory, but when Rome gets on the scene, they said there's nobody fighting Rome, right? Rome is one more superpower. So Pax Romana, or Roman peace. We're all building up to this. All right, so here's a map. This would be the Roman Empire. Some people say that the Mediterranean Sea, which is what you see in blue up there, was kind of like Rome's lake. They controlled everything around it. Any ships that were coming in and out, Strait of Gibraltar right here, this narrow passage connecting Africa and Europe. I said anybody coming in and out, right, trading. Look at the routes that these individuals will be able to take, getting goods from Africa down in Egypt, transporting them all around the place. But Rome had control over all that. Rome had a great navy. There wasn't really anybody that could get into Rome like that. And of course, as we looked at the eternal kingdom, right, we understand that Rome eventually getting that way and then splitting the Byzantine Empire to the east, Roman Empire to the west. So see, all that comes full circle. Ain't that amazing? So here we have Roman Empire. We've reached that point. Now, notice that the stability brought by Rome occupation allowed relative freedom of travel and a large degree of order throughout the empire. So again, Rome was in control. They would put up these other individuals. They did what Rome said, but what's important is all of these things coming down, it really helped for the spread of Christianity. That through all of these things going on, right, we have peace, we have this occupation, and again, the Romans felt like Christianity was about like Judaism, so they didn't really bother the Christians until they began to see that they were a little different, right, and then we went through the church history, the persecution that begins to arise against the Christians because they see that they're not like the Jews. So, again, it's helping this spread of Christianity. This is great. This is the big takeaway as well from Rome, is that they built these great roads. Now, this was in order to get supplies to this vast nation, or this vast empire that they were having to control. But not only that, but their military, right? So if you have an outbreak happening down in Egypt, right, you got your navy coming down there and you've got troops able to get down here. So they made a systems of very great roads. And then again, they forced this law upon everybody from that. So because of all of this, the Christians were able to go from town to town preaching the gospel. Now, notice this. I think you can see the blue lines that are running through. These were the main roads, essentially, through Rome. So you have the gospel coming out from Jerusalem. There in Acts chapter 2, you got Jerusalem right down here. And of course, a lot of times they're traveling by sea, but many times they're able to go and do all of these great things because of the roads that were given. They built some 50,000 miles of these highways. I'll show you the road here in just a moment. So the first road, this Via Appia, or the Appian Way. So maybe you've heard of that, the Appian Way. Appian, excuse me, I pronounced it. That don't sound right. Appian Way, the Appian Way. That's going to be going down through there. So many of these individuals were able to travel through these roads, and they were able to carry the gospel. So here's a picture of what the roads would kind of look like. Again, you think of an army going to help to stop out some kind of resistance. You've got chariots, you've got horses, you've got foot soldiers. They don't want to be bogged down in the mud, bogged down on these places. They want a straight shot, get on the road, head that away. Same thing with the gospel. Now I'm able to get and I'm able to travel relatively easily. Again, all under Roman control. So we're getting to all of this right here. Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, Paul writes that, "But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law." What a great time for God to bring about Christ. It's just amazing. All of these things lining up. Again, Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4. What do we have? From Babylon, we get this worldwide empire, where before, instead of it being tribes of individuals that were fighting in these different countries, if you will, these different empires going about, Babylon produces this amazing worldwide, in a sense, again, not worldwide, but the known world, through the Fertile Crescent, this empire that is brought about through Babylon. Then through Medo-Persia, because this Cyrus rising up, and he bring about this idea of the unchanging law. We remember in Esther that once the law was given in Medo-Persia, you could not change that law. You could not alter that law. So now individuals have this sense that, okay, a law is binding to us. In Greece, we have the universal language. Everybody's speaking the Koine Greek or the common Greek. So again, you have Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, but Greek is the universal, the trade language. That if you were going to speak anything around that place, it was going to be Greek. What a better way to talk to individuals across the Mediterranean Sea? We find that they say, all right, we've got a universal language. Rome, they bring world peace and the highway system. So what a great time for Christ to come. What a great time for our Savior. Many people think, well, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, why didn't God just send Jesus then and be done with it? We find that this is the time that God has appointed to bring his Son, the perfect time there in that. All right, we got to the top of the hour. Any questions? I know that was a lot. Any questions or comments about any of that? All right, so what we find then, I hope that has been beneficial to you, that you look at the Old Testament going into the New. What I'd like to do is, again, do that study in the Scriptures for a few weeks, and then we'll move on into the New Testament, and we'll kind of be looking at some teachings, and the parables and miracles of Christ is kind of what I have in mind. As always, unless you would rather me speak about something else, teach on something else, and if that's the case, just let me know, and I'll do my best. All right, I got it.